Hello everyone, Ruby Ravel here, a waxing and waning lunar goddess who has many faces, some of them soft, delicate, gentle, and unself-conscious as a child, others wrathful, demonic, and winter-bitten like the visage of the crone. Here to talk to you today about Venus in Cancer, and in order to understand the way in which this Venusian placement and transit relates and expresses its love to other people, but also what it values in partnerships, eroticism, and romance, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the nature of the moon. There's a wonderful Greek legend about a shepherd called Endymion, who was a handsome Adonis-type youth. And if there were any beautiful men, women, or hermaphrodites loitering around the dreamtime of ancient Greece, you could be damn sure that one of the gods or goddesses would have their eye on them and say, there's some hot stuff going on down there. I'm gonna keep one divine eye on it and see if there's an opening. And you'll notice that if we look at Jupiter or Neptune or Pluto, they were all quite rapacious and intensive or roaming or overwhelming in how they expressed their love for their mortals. And even Venus herself could be quite jealous and fickle in terms of how she expressed her romances. And very often it's not unusual for these tales to end tragically or to end in some kind of great transfiguration, which in itself reveals some of the mysteries of how those planets work. But it is none of those gods who fall in love with this handsome shepherd Endymion. It is Selene, the moon goddess. And she thinks that Endymion looks so beautiful when he is sleeping that the way she expresses her love for him is to put him into an eternal sleep in which he can dream happily forevermore. And when we look at this from an astrological level, it makes sense that the moon would want this, because the moon rules the unconscious. She rules the subconscious, the mind of the dreams, the part of us that is instinctual and animal, childish, infantile, and governed by its emotions and basic needs, and yet which also speaks not the language of rationality and logic, but the language of feeling, of intuition, and the basic mystery of what it is to immerse yourself feelingly in an experience rather than using any kind of logic or rational or intellectualization to create a separation from it. The moon wants to experience intimacy with those in which it is contacting, just as in dreams the barriers between anything becomes murky and we can just blend our colours into someone else's, like some impressionist watercolour. That's also what the moon wants in romance. So it's almost like the moon, in order to really be intimate with Endymion, had to take him back to that level of dreaming, to pull him away from the realm of consciousness and individuation and the heroic struggle to separate ourselves from the mass of humankind. And instead she's saying, no, come back to me. Come back to the womb. Come back to mother. Come back to the sacred dream time out of which your personality emerged. You know, it's hard going out there in the world all the time and adulting and being heroic and trying to make yourself special and trying to find your individual placement in the world. Wouldn't it be nice if you could just have some divine Circes from this? If you could just forget all the pressures of having to achieve and be ambitious and, you know, declare your might like Hercules and just relax a bit, like you did back when you were a child, lying helplessly but ever so cozily in your mother's arms. Don't you just wish you could just divorce yourself from the realm of action and go back to the safe, nurturing realm of dreams? And in many ways, this articulates what Venus in Cancer wants from a relationship. Someone with Venus in Cancer generally will experience themselves as being very sensitive. And by this we mean they are someone who is very aware of their own emotions, their own feelings, their own needs on an emotional and physical level. And this extends into the rest of the world around them. Instead of having this solid sense of separation from myself and the rest of the world, it's more like the whole world is consumed in a fluid, in an ocean, in a lake, in a river, in which all of this interconnectedness is felt on some level. And we can look at a beautiful, serene lake and think of how still and calm it is. And yet, even at its stillest and calmest, it is always interacting and hyper-responsive to the world around it. All it takes is a few breaths of wind and suddenly some ripples have come across for some mallards to land in it and send out great crashing waves in response, for a flock of geese to fly overhead and to be mirrored inversely below. So just by being quiescent and passive, already the lake is constantly mirroring and responding to everything that's going out into the environment out there. And even the smallest things can send tremors of shockwaves and ripples of great significance. And this is much how the energy of the Cancer experiences itself. Little things that might not ruffle the thick skin of a Taurus or a Capricorn are felt with great sensory and emotional intensity by Venus in Cancer. It feels the caresses of every last breath of wind. It feels the constant fluctuations in the moods and emotional environments going on out there in the world, and how those cause immediate responses on its inner world as well. And this is why the majority, though definitely not all, of Venus Cancer people can end up becoming empaths, because their awareness of their own needs and emotions is indivisible from their awareness of the emotions and emotional needs of the people out there, because they are always acting in response and tandem to one another. They are always operating on that fluid level of unconsciousness. And if you are strongly sensitive and attuned to the emotions of people out there, if you're going to pick up how other people are feeling, then caring about the feelings of others is going to be very important. Because if you are a very solid, thick-skinned person, then you may exist quite happily in your own private kingdom of the self and be totally oblivious to how anyone else is feeling. But if you're moving about and you are just living in this river of feeling that you have to be in response to whether or not, then it becomes very important to understand what's going on and trying to subtly navigate and manipulate and influence things so that they are affecting you in the way that you want and not the way that you don't want. And this is very often why Venus in Cancer people can be excessively, almost self-destructively caring and loving and very concerned with keeping everything nice and pleasant for all those around them. Because if someone is in their environment and that person is hurting, or they're upset, or they're angry, or jealous, or experiencing some kind of difficult emotion, the Venus Cancer person is going to feel it too. And so therefore it's in their best interests to try and massage and manipulate that feeling into being nicer, because then that will also reflect on how it's feeling too. So everyone else's feelings become its feelings at the same time. And that can sometimes feel like a great burden and be a source of great confusion, but it also gives it a great insight into the basic nature of other humans. There is this kind of psychic intuitiveness that can see how someone else is feeling, and it has this raw instinctual reaction of, what could I do to take away that bad feeling? How could I be a good mother in this moment? If I see that the someone in the room with me has some kind of boo-boo, how can I lick that wound and make it feel better? How can I protect that person and make them feel good again? Because I know that I will not feel safe, that I will not be able to rest, that my own heart will not be unpierced until I have soothed and healed and brought that other person into a feeling of safety. And so because Venus in Cancer people experience themselves as being so sensitive, it kind of makes the world a more dangerous place, because things that wouldn't hurt other people, or which they would be oblivious to even having been touched by, can touch you extremely. And therefore, valuing safety, valuing having some kind of security and protectiveness from that, valuing having a place of your own where you can remove yourself and withdraw from all the intensity and sensory overload of the world, becomes of the utmost importance. And that's why we associate Cancerian energies with domesticity, with the hearth, with the mother, with the kitchen, with the Aga around it, where everyone gravitates in a sense of nuclear community, because it is a space where one can switch off, where we're no longer having to assess and deal with all of those different issues. Instead, we can just relax into our own pool. And it's almost like if they have that private lake that's just always mirroring everything going back on into the world, and which can be so exhausting, by taking it away from the world and making a home their own private wellspring, then it's not responding to anything but themselves and the people they've invited there. And that's more manageable, and they can have peace. So whereas if we think about the sign across, or the sign either side really, about Gemini and Leo both needing an audience, both needing interactions with the outside world, Cancer needs a place where it can safely withdraw into its inner world. And in order for its relationships to function on a level that will satisfy it, then it also needs people that it can invite and trust to look after its inner world as well. Because if you're letting someone get close to you as Venus Cancer, you're letting them get in touch with a very deeply emotional and sensitive nature. That person could hurt you very deeply, and therefore if you're inviting them into that space, you want to make sure that they are safe. You want to make sure that they aren't going to hurt you, that they are trustworthy, that they can be a safe container for you. And I do find it's not unusual for Venus and Cancer people to gravitate towards people who maybe are much more solid and rocky and stony and earthy and immutable and unchanging, because it's almost like they're looking for that person to be a safe enclosure for them. If they are that deep, dark, shadowy wellspring of the unconscious, then it's almost like that partner can be the stone circle that is brought around the well to protect it from its waters being polluted or depurified in some way. Because the moon is constantly waxing and waning, and therefore the heart of Venus in Cancer is constantly waxing and waning as well, always going through these cycles that are responding intensely to their own inner drama. And whereas with Leo on the other side, that drama gets projected and extroverted out into the environment, instead with Venus in Cancer, that drama is experienced as coming out from the environment and then having to be internalized within, and therefore needing a safe cocoon in which it can be nested and nestled to preserve those dreams that are so sacred. So it's looking for a partner who can swaddle it, who can be like a parent for it, who can give it this safe space. But it also wants to be able to give that to someone in turn. Because with our Venus placements that show us what we value, I think especially for the first 4 signs of the zodiac, it can be very hard for those Venus placements to imagine that anyone could value anything different. And so if they love someone, they also want to make that person feel safe and protected. They're going to be hyper and alert and vigilant to every last change in their emotions. They're going to want to tend to any changes that it sees in their needs. It's going to want to meet all of those things. And so it's not just that it wants to be a child again, to regress in this infantile way in a cozy relationship. It also wants to mother and nurture the other person, so you can both have the luxury of being like children. However, one of the dangers and weaknesses of Venus in Cancer is that it has so much love and nurturing energy that it wants to give, and it wants to see the best in people. It wants to believe that everyone is pure at heart, that through all of the outer displays that we show to the world, we're all just sensitive, vulnerable children underneath. And this is true, but it also means they can have a rose-tinted perception of people who are just exploiting their generous and caring nature. There are some people who can hone in on a Venus in Cancer and sees that, oh, this is a shop that's always open for business. This is a wellspring that's always going to keep giving. Well, I'm in the mood to keep taking and without having to do little work, so I'm just going to set up shop here and make a nice business of this. And that need to give and to mother and to care can be so strong that codependency is a big risk factor with Venus in Cancer, because it can have someone who's just parasitic and abusive and manipulative attach someone to them, but if that person has given them the impression that they need the Venus in Cancer person, then it can be very hard for them to detach, because they are still meeting that basic need to be needed. And to separate from that, even if it's dangerous, toxic, abusive, or unsatisfying on so many levels, means that the safe container and structure that and home that you've tried to build with the other person, you're going to have to knock down. You're going to have to leave that cozy womb. You're going to have to climb out of the well and go back out into that daylight realm that you don't like very much. And it's very much that feeling of, well, better the devil I know, better the devil I don't. But also just the safety of knowing what you're working with, and the willingness as well to make excuses for that other person, to say, oh yeah, they might be mean or grumpy or resentful or bitter or nasty or violent, but I know it's just because they're experiencing this or that pain on the inside. And again, that might be true to a point, but is it worth being the receptacle of someone else's psychic garbage just because they don't want to take responsibility for it? Whereas Venus Cancer feels that inherent responsibility for other people's emotions, and learning to respect and honor those emotions and needs while also having personal boundaries is one of the big challenges of this Venus placement, which is why Cancer is symbolized by the crab or the crawdad or some kind of crustacean. On the inside, these things are tender, soft crab meat. They stand no chance. But if they build these solid shells around them that contain that tender flesh, if they can construct these exoskeletal carapaces, then they've made the world a safer place. And just as there's that strong nesting instinct to have your own physical home that is your own protection against the hardships of the world, Cancer has to learn that just because it feels its inner child, just because it feels that kind of innocent, childish, good-natured purity, that doesn't mean everyone else in the world experiences things that way. And in that sense, they also need to have a psychic shell around them to be able to distinguish between those who are good and those who are not safe. And this is where some of the indirectness and the shyness of the Cancerian nature comes in, because you do meet some Cancerian people who are just out, much more extroverted, much more in your face and hello and right there to greet you and respond to you every step of the way. But and many of them are like that once you get to know them, once you've earned their trust. But for many of them, they learn to be a bit more cautious and sensitive and reserved when they first meet people. And therefore they will kind of move back and forth around the person so they can observe them, so they can observe their possible changes and vacillations and just gradually decide for themselves, is this someone I can trust myself with? Is this someone I can trust my heart with? And they'll often go back and forth, that they'll come to you and they'll have these brief moments where suddenly they're very intimate, they're very flirtatious, they're very emotional, they're very giving, they're very sharing. And just when the other person thinks, oh, this person seems into me, I'm going to start flirting back, the Venus in Cancer freaks out and it scuttles back into its shell and goes, oh, well, I don't know, that was quite a strong reaction. I don't know if I can take that. That was a bit much. What if there's some danger there that I haven't foreseen? What if this person's, not safe to trust my heart with? I'm going to withdraw for a bit and see if they still stick around. And if that person has stuck around, well, then maybe they sneak back over and they go, well, you know, I do still kind of like you. And then they may zip back again like a typewriter that's reached the end of its tether. So it can be this constant waxing and waning cycle before it fully lets you into that dreamy inner world in which it spends most of its time. However, that is the basic kind of aloof, indirect approach. But it's true, not all Cancer placements or Venus in Cancer placements will build their shell in the same way. And some, I have found, respond by building a shell that actually looks quite menacing and daunting. You know how you get these beautiful moths that have like the death skull design on them, or these flowers that, you know, are beautiful but secrete poison. Sometimes Venus in Cancers are like this in terms of they know how sensitive and needy and emotional they are on the inside, and they, to protect themselves as an apotropaic mechanism to keep the wrong people at bay, it may actually deliberately build quite a daunting, severe, scary, or gothic or macabre exterior as a way of saying, I'm a bad bitch, don't mess with me, I will destroy you. And really, they're saying, actually, I'm terrified of being destroyed, please don't hurt me. But if they can at least put across the impression that they are actually much tougher and stronger and resilient and dangerous and poisonous and toxic than they actually are, then they've achieved their purpose in feeling like they have separated the wheat from the chaff. And that those who have still approached that lair of the dragon's cave without running away are the ones who are worthy to stay. And this is also true, I will say, for people I know with Cancer rising. One of my best friends is Cancer rising, and he is one of the most extrovertedly, flamboyantly masculine people I know. He's built like a shit brick house, as they say, incredibly muscular, great personal trainer, and often deliberately comes across in quite disruptive and aggro manner. But it's all just Cancer rising putting on a front, just saying, just all trying to disguise the fact that he is, when it comes down to it, a very sensitive person who cares very deeply about the people in his life, so deeply to the point that it hurts, and therefore has to build up all these tests and defense mechanisms and ways of regulating his exposure to other connections that are probably going to affect him more than they will the other person. Now, a good friend of mine has Venus in Cancer as well, and before I made this video, I consulted with her. I just said, please, you know, tell me how you experience being a Venus in Cancer. I feel like I understand. I just want to make sure I don't miss anything out. And one of the things she said was, oh yes, Ruby, you know, when I see other astrologers talking about this, you know, they talk about the one side, the sweet night side, blah, 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 and all the rest, but they often miss out the fact of how manipulative this sign can be. And I say, sweetie, have you seen my channel? You know I like to focus on the dark side rather than the light of the signs, because that's the part I generally find more interesting, but also because these things can happen so unconsciously, it can be very easy to overlook. And because the neediness and sense of well-being of Venus in Cancer is so strongly dependent on the natures of the people around them, learning to subtly control and influence the emotions of people around them becomes something they have to be very skilled at, to be able to do that, but in that indirect, crustaceous way, so that it doesn't look like that's what they're actually trying to achieve. It's all going on subconsciously below the surface, and this in itself is a neutral thing, because if you're any kind of healer, if you're any kind of therapist, psychologist, whatever, you know that a good portion of your job involves knowing how to subtly massage someone's emotions into one state or another. Performers do this as well, and actors, in terms of doing certain things or acting in a certain way to evoke a certain emotional response. But because its sense of safety is so dependent on other people being dependent on it, that fear of being abandoned, of having someone that you care about lose you, can make Venus in Cancer act in all kinds of strange ways sometimes that can be almost as self-sabotaging as the more typical scorpionic behavior. Sometimes in relationships this can manifest as the Venus in Cancer person being so afraid that a given friend or lover or partner will outgrow them in some way, that they might actually deliberately undermine them and keep them small and try and deter them from doing anything that it feels could potentially separate them, whilst also on the surface pretending that it's supporting them. Or it may make someone feel so guilty for potentially removing themselves from them that even if they're not saying it on the surface, they're making it pretty clear that if you go off and do that thing that you want or need to do for your own sake, you are hurting me, so don't you dare. But then this can also express itself sometimes in the types of partners that Venus Cancer chooses. Whilst on the one hand it might want those stolid, thick-skinned, safe, strong people who can be someone they can build, who can be their fortress that they can cool themselves within. Sometimes they want the opposite. Sometimes if they want a partner who they feel is safe, who they are sure is never going to leave them, they might deliberately pursue a partner who they feel is damaged or weak in some way, or maybe someone who has some kind of long-standing chronic illness, whether of a mental, physical, or in-between variety. Someone who always needs care and compassion and looking after in some way, because then they can look at that person and go, oh, yes, they are needy. They will always need me. They will never outgrow me because these conditions will be with them for life. And therefore I know that this is a safe partner because they'll always need Mummy Venus in Cancer out here. They'll never be tempted to be like the sun and go on those big heroic adventures out in the world. No, they'll stay right here with my bosom with their face nestled up in my cleavage, because if you get to be there, folks, why on earth would you want to be anywhere else? You know, they're the kind of people who will deliberately go to an animal shelter and adopt the dog that everyone else has rejected. You know, maybe it's a puppy with only 3 legs, or a tortoise with only 1 eye, or half a shell, but in the reflection of that fragmented, sensitive creature, they see a little mirror of themselves, and they say, I'm going to pick you because everyone else rejected you, but also because I know you will stay with me. And I really need someone to stay with me. I need security and I need permanence in the world to reflect my own constant sense of impermanence. And yet that impermanence itself is a reflection of my permanently emotional and sensitive and needy nature. Anyway, I could go on a lot more about that, but I don't want to make this video too long, because if they get too long, it just becomes a pain in the ass to upload them, because I need a better computer, or at least better video processing software, and then I can just let my mouth run amok in all the little directions that it wants to go. Hope you enjoyed this video. Please, Cancerian placements of YouTube, let me know how you feel about this and how you experience this energy in your own relationships. You know, there's some degree to that I can heavily respond to a lot of what I've said here, because I have Sagittarius moon, which, while its energies are very different from Cancer, that moon is right at my midheaven, so it's one of the most strongest and dominant parts of my chart, and disposited by Chiron in Cancer. But let's not go into that now. Anyway, Mama Ruby loves you. You ever need a nice bosom to lay your head on, it's right here. Toodaloo.